Well, Coasters, it's Bruce here, and it's the first day of 2021. It's my first interview for the year, and it's a beautiful coast day. And I've got the pleasure of interviewing a lady from a pioneer coast family who's come home to have a look around, Rosalie Sugrue. Rosalie, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to interview you.
Oh, Bruce, it's just wonderful to be here, and thank you so much, because I'm really pleased to do this on behalf of my family that stretch back 5 generations on both sides. All of them are gold diggers.
Goodness me. Now, what's your full name?
Well, my full name is Rosalie May Reynolds Sugrue.
Whereabouts were you born,
I was born in the Hampden Street nursing home, as most of my peers were, here in Hokitika.
What was it like?
The birth.
No. Going back, you'd have, like, I never saw the Hampden Street thing.
Well, it was,
what was
just like a big old house, or sort of a big villa. But I mean, generations of us were born there. Not too many generations, I suppose. My grandmother, May Stoop, she lived in Renew, and I know she came in, she had 7 children, and all were delivered by midwife at Renew, but she had twins, and when they knew she was having twins, and she did come in to the Hampden Street nursing home for her twins.
Was it a big old, wooden building?
So it was a big old, like a big old grand house. That's what it looked like.
And was it friendly?
Oh, well, I do remember my brother was born 5 years after me, and I went to visit my mum, and I sort of got on the bed to give her a cuddle, and I was shooed off.
The matrons.
They were very strict in those days.
What year were you born?
I was born in 1941.
So what does that make you now?
Oh, I'm not very good at maths, but I'm still an active woman in my 70s.
You certainly are. You're certainly in very good condition. Who are your mum and dad?
Right, well, my mother was Elva May Stoop, and she married Winston Austin Reynolds. Now, my dad, Winston, he was born in Waitaha, because his grandfather had won a ballot for land. They divided up the Waitaha Valley into farm lots. Yep. But more people wanted them than they had lots, and so they went in ballots. And my great-grandfather, James Reynolds, he won a ballot, and it was the section that's right in the heart of the Waitaha Valley. The school was right next door, and as was the community hall and the church across the road. So that's where he was born. I believe he was delivered by a doctor from Ross in the first frost of the season.
Oh, now, Waitaha has been a producer of so many wonderful people.
It was a great little community,
yeah.
Waitaha.
Now, do you know that the hall there has just received $165,000 to rebuild the hall?
Oh, how fabulous.
Yeah, so pretty exciting.
You see, I remember going to a dance there as a teenager in the hall.
Yeah. And
when my dad was a young person in the valley, they had a band of young people, and they used to have dances regularly for the Waitaha Valley people.
Now, Winston became a mayor of Hokitika, didn't he?
He did. He was on the council for 26 years in all, I believe.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, he was always into politics, all that I can remember.
Oh, politics is great. What did your dad do for a living?
Well, he was a powerhouse operator at McKay's Creek and the Forks. I know McKay's Creek's still there. Is the Forks still operating?
On the road to Canary?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Right. Well, Dad was brought up on the farm in Waitaha, and he was an only child, and of course the family had great hopes that he would take over the farm. But his real interest was radio, and Morse code and ham radio and ringing radio sets. And so he left the farm and he went up to Wellington and got his radio ticket, as they called it, for servicing radios. And he actually lived at McKay's Creek when he came back, and was a powerhouse operator there. And there was a little batch. You had to go across the river, what they call a flying fox now, but in those days they called it the cage.
Right.
And you pull yourself over on the cage, and there was a little house there, a little hut that had a sort of a kitchen-y area and a bedroom area. And there were two beds in the bedroom area, but Dad's was a permanent one because Dad lived there. Had to be staffed 24/7.
Yes.
And so it was shift work. But Dad lived there, but of course he wasn't on duty every night. Someone else would come and sleep at the other bed when he wasn't on.
And so what did he do after?
So when he married Mum, he carried on working there, but he had this radio business on the side. And he would do country runs, Kokotau Kotarangi, over Blue Spur, asking people if their radio sets needed mending.
Right.
And so that was the sideline.
And who was Mum?
Mum was Alva Stoop, and she was born in Remu. Her dad was in charge of a big mine. They called it the Jerk. Mum, as a child, used to release the floodgates for the dam at the top of the Remu Hill to feed the
turbines or
what do they have for gold? The sluice.
The sluice, yeah.
Yeah, the sluice. The turbines, that's another thing. Yeah, up at the top of where Dad worked at Mackay's Creek. You had to rake the leaves off the screens there where the water rushed down. You know, the race comes from Canary.
Yeah.
And up the top there, where it shoots into the turbines, there are screens, metal screens that leaves and logs get caught on.
I think they're still there.
They probably are.
Yeah.
Because I've climbed up there many times and helped Dad rake leaves.
And of course the West Coast Wilderness Trail now follows it is beautiful through there.
Oh, that
absolutely
would be
beautiful.
wonderful. Yeah, but so Dad kept working there, but of course he lived at home then, and he did this radio business, but that led him in to taking a great interest in television.
Right.
Now, you probably know that the Hokitika Museum has New Zealand's oldest television set, which was built by my dad.
I didn't know that.
You did, Bruce.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
Really should. It's when we went digital, they had a competition to find New Zealand's oldest TV set.
Right.
And my dad won it. And Mum was flown up to Auckland and put up at Sky Tower and was on TV with a picture of Dad and the TV set that she insisted the museum find because she knew it was there and they'd sort of lost it. But they found it. And they actually had it going very briefly up in Auckland. And I benefited by their award. Was a 46-inch screen, which a few years ago was considered very big.
Massive.
And I still have that.
Wow.
So Dad was really keen on TV, and on top of our house, which was 241 Hampden Street, right at the very end, just before the hill down, past the racecourse, Dad had this enormous aerial on the roof, held up with guy lines.
Right.
And he built a kit-set television before New Zealand had TV, and he could pick up signals from Australia.
I can recall in Westport.
Right, yeah, that's right.
Exactly the same thing.
But Hokitika beat Westport because Hokitika, with a few other people who are interested in radio, when New Zealand got their own TV, there was an aerial on Sugarloaf in Christchurch that Dad and his mates could get a freak signal on the wharf here.
Wow.
And the wharf building was still there, and they got a very big old radio aerial that they put up on the wharf that got the signal, and people would go into the old wharf building there, sit on bales of hay and banana boxes and things.
And watch TV.
Oh,
I love it.
History that that Hokitika received TV before almost any other small town in Hokitika.
Rosie, I was interviewing John Nanskiville, and he was saying that there was the freak signal come through Woodstock,
Yeah.
and they could pick up.
They could pick it up there
All
too.
cloudy and a bit hard to tell what it was.
Yeah.
But so when your mum took you home from the home, where did you go to? What was your home?
Hamden Street, 241 Hamden Street.
And is it still there?
It's still there. It's on the corner of Livingston and Hamden Street.
Livingston and Hampton. On the left or the right? It'd be the left-hand side.
Going up Hamden Street, we're on the right.
On the right-hand side?
Yeah.
Okay, I know the place.
Where the primary school is now, that was dead end.
Yes.
And so Livingston Street just stopped, and there was nothing there because everyone went to the Hokitika District High School, which is Primer 1 to Form 6. And I went right through there.
Now tell me, as a child, what did you do for fun?
What did I do for fun? Well, biking, swimming, the swimming bars, very popular.
Yeah.
And of course, a bit of swimming in the river. My uncle Errol Stoop, he ran the Boys Brigade here. I mean, the Boys Brigade I think is still big here, but it was very big in the very early years. They had the biggest company in New Zealand, the 4th Westland.
Wow.
And Errol was into taking the kids up Mount Tahur and bike rides to Haast and over to Canterbury. They did all sorts of outdoor things. So Errol loved to swim in the sea. And so when I was very young, I know as the mayor, you're not supposed to encourage people to swim in the sea here. My uncle Errol would take me out swimming in the sea here. And I used to love that. And also, breaking the ice at the swimming pool was a great thing to do. First one in of the season, because it wasn't heated, of course, it was called breaking the ice. And the kids always queued up the day of opening to be the first to jump in. But one year I beat them because my uncle Errol was friends with old Doc, who actually lived inside the swimming pool complex, had a little hut.
Right.
Doc was a returned serviceman, I think, possibly from the First World War. He limped very badly. He couldn't have possibly saved anyone, I don't think, if they were drowning, but Doc was custodian of the pool, and he lived in this little hut in the corner and used the pool facilities for showering and what have you. But my uncle Errol said, we'll climb over the wall. I've made arrangements with Doc. We parked bike against the wall to the swimming pool, climbed up on the bike seat he held me, and we climbed over the wall, and I broke the ice that season without anyone knowing it.
And here we are a few years later, and you remember it just like yesterday.
Just like yesterday.
You'll be pleased to know, Rosalie, if we went down the beach today, there'll be young fellas down there on their boogie boards.
Oh, there are now.
Yeah, and it seems to be.
I'm glad that's.
Yeah, it's
Because I know they used to have skull and crossbones painted all around the place, telling people not to go in.
Of course. And what about blackberries? Did you ever pick blackberries?
We did, especially in Waitaha, or Waitaha as they say now, because Dad knew the people down there, and even though we lived here, we could go down there and blackberry. But Remy Woodstock used to, because my mum's family are Remy Woodstock area, Dad's Waitaha.
What about mushrooms?
No, never went mushroom.
Never chased them?
No.
Did you have, Rosalie, did you have a nickname when you were growing up?
Well, I was Rosebud when I was very little, but not really a nickname as such. Ro, my brother was Ron, and I'm Ro. Ron and Ro Reynolds, we were here.
Now, whereabouts did you attend primary school?
Well, as I said, I went right through from Primer 1 to Form 6 at the Hokitika District High School, which was just renamed Westland High, but the infant block was across the road from where the buildings are now.
So in Park Street, on the other side of the road?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were they old brick buildings or wooden buildings, can you recall?
Yeah, well, yes, the infant block was a typical of that period, wooden with the veranda out the front, but the old original school was quite severe stone, 18 something, and it actually, it was quite an imposing brick and stone building with high windows. You couldn't look out the windows, couldn't be distracted.
Were you a book reader?
I was. I was very fond of reading. And I was one of the few who were librarians as a voluntary thing as schoolgirls at the real Carnegie Library. There was the public library when you came in on the left, and there was the children's library on the room on the right.
This is in the Carnegie
In
building?
the Carnegie building.
Okay.
And the children's library was staffed by volunteer schoolgirls from, I think, let me see, it would have probably been from 4 to 5, or would it be, yeah, I think it might have been an hour or an hour and a half every afternoon after school. But the big bonus of doing that, if you were a volunteer librarian in holiday time, there was a lot of us wanting this perk, you got a paid job because the library was open for long hours in the school holidays.
Right. And what was the building like? Was it a centre for Hokitika back in those days?
Back in those days, libraries were very quiet, severe places, and the librarian was a very shush sort of lady, and people would tiptoe around.
It's one change we've seen, isn't it? In the hospitals, the matron was, they were very strict. The librarians,
absolutely,
exactly the same. It was just the way.
But see, in the children's library, that was a bit different. Children were allowed to talk, but of course, what's her name? Lorne. I've forgotten her name. It was rumoured that she couldn't read, and her dock of the baths couldn't swim. I don't know how true these things are, but those were the rumours at the time. But she was severe. But the children's library was a fun sort of place. Well, not fun, I suppose. I think of fun now, but you could enjoy being there. Yeah.
So what about high school?
Well, high school, yes. I went to high school in 1955, which was the opening of the new wooden buildings, the original Western High buildings that are there today.
Yeah.
And there was a book written about the history of the school and that sort of thing. And I remember our class was selling these booklets about the history of all the little schools that combined to, because there was schools, primary schools everywhere. Woodstock, Rimu, Kokotaya, Kortarangi, I think even Ruatap might have had a school at one stage. There were little
schools all over the place.
Yes.
Did you have a favourite subject at high school?
I loved writing stories, but
which you've continued to this day.
Which I continue to this day. Yes. I was not sporting. My brother was very sporty. He was captain of the first 15 and the first 11 and those sort of things. But
so you got the brains and he got the sporting ability.
Well, I think he was the only one from his year that actually went to Canterbury University.
Oh well.
I only went to Christchurch Teachers College.
So did you have a favourite teacher, and can you remember him or her?
I remember loads of teachers right back from Mrs. Richards. I'm not sure if she's still alive. She probably is. She used to play the organ at St Andrew's Church. I think she's got a daughter, Catriona. I think Mrs. Richards is still alive. She is
still alive?
She is still alive.
Yes, she is, yeah.
Right, well, she was Miss Anderson.
Right.
And she was my infant teacher. And I remember she taught me how to curtsy, because when Governor Freiberg came to town on a tour after the First World War, the school was marched down to the council offices that were in front of the Memorial Hall.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And Dad had his speakers up. Dad used to have his sound system that was hired for any public event, because people didn't have PA systems. And Dad would go around to country picnics.
Yep.
And of course Ron and I would get presents from Santa Claus at all sorts of country picnics, particularly Waitaha one. But that day, I don't know why I was chosen, but my dear teacher, Miss Anderson, selected me to present the bouquet to Lady Ferguson.
Wow.
Lady Freiberg.
Wow.
And so I had to learn to curtsy, so that's what she did. She taught me how to curtsy.
Now, well, she's just recently gone into care.
Has she?
Yes, and
Here?
her husband. Yes, she is here.
Right.
And her husband was Ivan.
That's right.
Yes, I
Had
worked
a
with Ivan
grocery
out.
shop on Reynolds Street.
Yeah, and I worked with him out the sawmill. He was a
Right.
storeman out there as well.
Right.
Really nice guy.
But I worked at Seaview. You might like to know. That's really interesting. Oh yeah, I'm suggesting the questions instead of answering them. I thought
Tell me about Seaview. You worked there, didn't you?
I did. Yes, my first job. I mean, when I left school, I'd sort of hoped to be a teacher, and I had no other thoughts really. But there were so few options for girls in those days that really girls could either work in a shop, work in an office, or be a nurse or a teacher. And I thought, I want to be a teacher. I didn't get selected. I thought, oh dear, what do I do now?
How dare they?
Exactly, because that's what I was looking at. And so I thought, oh, well, perhaps I better get a job in a shop was my first thought, and I went to sort of Stopforth and Oliver's, and I were sort of people I knew who worked in shops, and said, could I get a job? And I said, no, we haven't any vacancies. I thought, oh, well, it's got to be nursing, doesn't it? And I thought, oh, nursing. I thought, of course we've got Seaview Hospital. And my uncle Errol, who had worked at Oliver's as a person who cleaned the shoes and half sold them and did those sort of things in the back room, when they stopped doing that, I think they still do a little bit of it, but it's much less, in later times, he got a job at Seaview. And I thought, I'll be like my Uncle Errol and I'll work at Seaview. And in those days, the male side of the hospital was really quite separate to the female side. All the women were in the villas on the female side and the men the other. And it was one organisation, and we did have social events with the patients mingling, but the staff didn't do much mingling. They kept pretty much on their own side. And you could live in at the nurse's home. Some hospitals required you to live in if you were a trainee nurse, because you train on the job. But Seaview didn't, though it had a nurse's home, and we had lectures there, because I started to train. I was going to make a career of Seaview nursing.
Yeah.
And you learned on the job. But I still lived at home at 241 Hammond Street, which was quite a bike ride, because you started at 7 o'clock in the morning to bike from the top, the far end of Hampden Street up the hill, up the hill to the female side, which was the nearest to Westland Hospital, to get to work. But as a nurse, you were very well looked after in those days. I mean, all your uniforms were provided, and you had 8 of them. Your shoes, your white shoes and stockings were provided. And you went on at 7 o'clock and you fed the patients their breakfast, got them up and fed them. Then you went over to the nurse's home and you had a hot breakfast the government provided. And then you went back to the wards.
Can you recall any of the people you worked with?
Oh, yes.
What sort of names?
John Gillespie, he started the same year as me, 59.
Right.
He's South Side, he
Yes.
still lives over there. Roberts.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Ron.
Yeah.
Was it Ron?
Yeah.
Duncan
his
Davidson,
wife,
I suppose, ended up there.
Sanus Douglas, Jan Douglas is still here. You think, I'm sorry, I'm thinking, because the old ones have sort of died now. But we used to just call it the mental, I will confess, but it wasn't a derogatory term. Like, to use the term mental now is considered very derogatory. It wasn't like that then. It was Seaview, up the hill, the mental, and we work at the mental, but the town people really embraced those patients. They'd bring them down some of them down to rugby matches. The town people would visit.
Do you think it provided a good service?
Oh, excellent.
Mm.
Now, it wasn't just a local service. People don't quite understand this. I mean, there were 500 patients up there. Now, they weren't all coast locals. I mean, it did service the coast, of course. And they were mostly kept in what we call the admission villas, and they'd be, people who were temporarily unwell.
Yeah.
The bulk of Seaview was an overflow from both Christchurch and Nelson. of children who'd been born retarded in some way.
Yep.
And in those days, you just put your child away, your baby, if the government would look after it, and you just sort of forgot you'd given birth to such a child. That's sort of how it
Must
was.
have been sad. Some of it must have been very sad.
Oh, terribly sad, but it was of its time, and looking back on it, you could view it from a different way, and I think that hospital was a good place to be, because these people were well cared for. The conditions were Spartan by today's standards, but they were well fed, they were well clothed, and those capable of working worked, and they took a great pride in their work. You see, the patients worked in the sewing room, for example, and they made dresses. The patients had cotton dresses that were fashionable at the time, you know, with gathered skirts and bright prints, and the others worked in the laundry and the kitchens and these sort of things, or polishing brass. There was a lot of brass. And our patients were not ill-treated. They really weren't. They were well looked after, though there were Spartan times, and there were, you know, lock-up cells, which now people get horrified about, but it was necessary at the time, and it wasn't cruel. It was the best interest of the patients. You know.
Rosalie, how many staff worked there? Was 500 patients. There must
There were
be
500 patients. There were 5 main villas on the female side. There was the admission villa, and there would always be 2 on there, and that only had about 20 to 30 patients in it. I'm only talking female now.
Yeah.
There was sick villa with the ones who were physically ill.
Yeah.
Huia, that usually had a staff of about 5 or 6 on, and that would be 50 patients there. Now, they weren't all, in fact, they were very seldom in bed. We believed in getting them up and getting them out in the sun when it was sunny and that sort of thing. But they were the frailer patients, and some, you know, would have cancer or things like that we just had to look after as an ordinary nurse would. So there would be about 6 there. Then there was Huria and Pereira, which were like these grown-up ones, are mostly grown up in an institution, but were fairly okay. You know, they could live they wouldn't have been able to look after themselves without supervision, but they'd only have a staff of 2 on in those, and there'd be 50 odd in each. There's 50 odd in most of them. Huia, the back fellow, what's his name? I've forgotten his name. Tui. That had it was called the refractory ward, which went sort of dangerous, liable to escape. Mind you, it was very easy to escape. There was just a fence around the villa about this high, and there was no fence around Seaview. I mean, people escaped, as they call it, all the time. But I remember the first time I was a nurse at Tui, and it was a sunny day, and all the patients, after they were up and dressed and looked after everything, they were put out into this yard, and the nurse, Jay Tomlinson, I think her name was, and said, now if any jump the fence, you've got to go after them and bring them back. Oh.
You know, a lot of people up there had head injuries, and of course that brought often a violent side every now and then to
But occasionally,
yeah.
Now I think that's more the male side.
Right.
And of course drugs had come in then, but we tried not to have them too drugged up. We didn't want them to be zombies.
Yep.
We really didn't. But here's an interesting thing that you might like to know about. Our glowworm, Dale, do you know how that was discovered? I bet you don't.
I don't.
Because nobody, I think, probably remembers this. Sometimes patients did genuinely want to get away and they would disappear. As school kids, we thought every time the siren went at Seaview, that was a sign a patient was escaping, but it wasn't. It was a patient setting it off with the broom handles, as they could do quite easily.
Yes.
But patients would occasionally try and make a getaway because they were disturbed or that.
Yep.
And one night, my Uncle Errol was on night duty and a patient had got away on them, and there was a big search party out. And so he took the bush from the top of the Seaview Hill, going through the bush, down the hill, looking for this patient, and he found the glowworms.
That's where, wow.
And there was sort of no track in from the lower side,
Yeah.
but he, as I said, was captain of the Boys Brigade, so the Boys Brigade made a rough track in, and this was an outing for the, sort of specially known to the Boys Brigade of that era as a special place where the Boys Brigade went.
Well, that's amazing, and it's still one of our most popular attractions.
That's right. Then but I mean, it's little humble beginnings. The town folks didn't know it was there.
Incredible. At school, how would a close friend have described you? Were you a ratbag? Were you noisy? Were you quiet? Were you reserved?
Well, I was a bit surprised when I came to a school reunion here of those of us who'd started secondary school from 55 to 55 to 60, and we were trying to organise class lot photos. And I said, well, obviously we've got to have those that started in 55 here. And one of them said, there she goes again, forever organising people.
So that was probably what your friend would have thought, a very good organiser.
So, and everyone laughed, you see, and I thought, oh, this has rung bells with people. As if they laughed knowingly, you know, and I thought, so, but I didn't know I had that. Though I did run a Secret Six society, you know, the Enid Blyton Secret Seven, you probably didn't, but it was a...
I read every Secret Seven book.
Right.
I read every one. I still got them at home.
We had our Secret Six society.
Yeah.
And we wore navy gym frocks, and we had our code names embroidered on felt badges, our initials and code inside of the bibs of our navy gym frocks. And we had adventures at not the cemetery, the race course, because I live fairly near the race course, and down in the paddocks below where the camping ground, was the camping ground down there now? Yeah, you know, we used to roam around Prosser's Bush, it was just called Bush then. We had adventures in our Secret Six.
Wasn't Eden Blyton a most amazing author?
Oh, she was.
You know,
gave us a real love for Britain, actually. I'm very keen to do the OE because of that. But yes, so I love books, and you know, we did these things like that. What was your question?
oh, we were just wondering about how your friends would have described you.
Oh, right. Well, yes, so I did organise the Secret Six Society with a bit of help from Mum, who provided afternoon tea. So once a week, these girls would come to my place, have afternoon tea, and we'd have a meeting that would have a password, and you'd knock on the door and have to remember the password.
I love it. So when you're growing up, when you're becoming a teenager, did you have something that you wanted to be?
Well, you see, I wanted to be a teacher. Oh, I didn't tell you how I got back to being a teacher, did I? Because I am a teacher. I only lasted at Seaview 1 year because the tutor sister left. And I had one stripe on my cap, and I was getting paid extra for it. And they couldn't attract another tutor sister back to Hokitika.
Oh, no.
And it would have meant I'd have to go back to being a nurse aide on a lesser wage. So I applied again for Teachers College and got in.
Bit of life experience under your belt, you see.
And it helped.
Yeah,
it really did.
It would do. So, when you left high school,
Yeah.
what was your first job? Was it Seaview?
That was Seaview.
Okay, and then after that?
And then after that, Teachers College. Yeah,
Right.
and teaching.
And where did you teach?
Well, my first job was Cobden. They called it the PA year. In those days, you went to Teachers College for 2 years.
Yeah.
And then you had a year out teaching where you weren't qualified, you're sort of on trial, and that was called your probationary assistant year, commonly known as PA.
Yeah.
And they would place us all as near to our hometowns as we could. We were spaces. They've posted me to Otera.
No.
And I wrote and objected. I said, this is no place for a single woman. Because of course, I thought, it doesn't get the sun ever, does it?
And they had a school there?
They had a school there.
Was there many kids?
Oh, I think it was a 2-teacher. It must have been for me to be a PA.
Of course.
But it was a railway settlement. There were
Yeah.
families there and single men's quarters. There were no single women at Otera except locals who worked in the tea rooms, the railway station.
Did you see the sun often up there?
Well, see, I did not get that job because I refused it.
I love it. So what has it taken its
so then
place?
they put me, when I kicked up, said, you know, this is just not on. They put me to Cobden.
And after Cobden?
After Cobden, I was at Hokitika Primary. Well, of course, I started having kids. I went overseas. I did the OE. And when I came back, I married Jack.
Well, hang on, let's go back to the OE. What happened there? Where did you go?
They could make fast.
Oh, gosh. She tried to sneak that one through, didn't she?
Well, after actually teaching at Cobden, which is the PA year, you were then had to do 2 years, or you see, you were paid to go to Teachers College. We didn't come out of Teachers College with a great debt. It was wonderful. The government paid you to go, and you had just enough money to live on.
Yep.
And so I was in a hostel, and I made friends with hostel mates. We all went to our hometowns for our PA year, but because we become good friends, we said, anywhere in New Zealand where there's lots of vacancies, we'll go and we'll flat together. And so we did. And the town with the most vacancies that year was Fielding. So we flatted in Fielding for our 2 years.
A nice place too.
Yeah, except it was inland and it didn't have any sea and no real river, and I thought, this can't be right. It's got a town clock though, not too dissimilar to ours, but ours is better, of course. So then we decided we would do our 2 years and then we'd go overseas. We'd save our money and we'd go put it all into them, because that's the soonest we could leave the country without having to pay back the money.
Right.
You had to do those 3 years.
Yep.
Give the government that. It was a fine system, because then girls, I went overseas, flatted in London, went hitchhiking around all of the UK, and I was teaching in London, and 6 weeks summer holidays, when it rains mostly, but we hitchhiked our way through Wales, Ireland, Scotland, England. Yeah, wise. We were wise women. We went Wales, Ireland, Scotland, England. 6 weeks on the road.
Loved it?
We did coach tour of the continent, those sort of things. But I was only overseas for a year because Jack had met me while I was in Fielding. He lived in Greytown in the Wairarapa, and he was a bit keen, and I wasn't all that keen because I'd made this idea that I was going overseas. So I said to him, look, we've got to break this off because I've gone overseas. Do you know what he did? He came down from the Wairarapa and got a job as a carpenter here. So when I came back, because I'd come back to Hokitika, you have to go back to your hometown, of course, you have nowhere else to go back to. He was waiting for me.
Oh, I love it. Now, Rosalie, Jack, tell me about Jack. Tell me about 802.
Well, Jack was a great guy. He really was. He came to town wanting to marry me, and in fact he met me on the boat when I got back, and we bought an engagement ring in Wellington. But Jack had been a builder in the Wairarapa, but he came here as a carpenter. But he did start his own business. Worked for Kay Houseman initially, and Kay had a small building team like they have here. But when Jack went out on his own, Tralee was a baby. We lived. Our first flat Jack and I bought was opposite the old dairy factory, which was by Cass Square, just along from Cass Square. Is it Saul Street? What street is it?
Oh, the old dairy factory.
The old dairy factory. The old dairy factory. The cream. People would go there and buy cream. Can't think of the name of the street.
Right.
But anyway, my auntie, Eva Brent, she had a flat attached to her house opposite the dairy factory there, the old dairy factory, not far from Cass Square. But then we bought a 2-storied house on the corner of Hampden and Fitzherbert Street opposite St Andrew's Church. The fire brigade used it, burnt it. I was here on holiday once and they said, they're burning your house. And I went down and I saw our local fire brigade burning our two-storied house that was on that corner there.
And it's now an empty section.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Right. I didn't notice in the dark last night when we were out. But Jack went out on his own. He employed a carpenter, he trained a couple of apprentices, and he had the odd labourer. So it was a small firm.
Yeah.
But he built the flats in Hampden Street, the lower, right down towards the beach.
Yeah, next to Walls Motors.
Yeah, it used to be Winters Motors, and
Yes. Yep.
Winters are a family connection of mine. And then he built the flats on Gibson Quay that have been motels. I don't think they are at the moment.
About 3 of them together.
Yes.
Yes, I know the
yes.
ones. Yeah.
And he had a work shed on the front section. I think he built 3, and I think there's now 4 because the council wouldn't let him build right to the street. And there was an old shed on the street, and while that big old shed was still there, he could use it as a builder's shed.
Yeah.
So he had a builder's shed there, and we also built a section that on the other street that would have met our flats on the corner, and we were thinking that we might build through and have a larger accommodation thing there, but we didn't because the Greenies shut down the coast, didn't they, and builders went out of business. But before that he built our wonderful house up on the terrace. So we sold the flats in Hampden Street to build our lovely house on the terrace. I don't know if you can see a photo of that.
Well, I'll zoom in on that further on. Where did Jack come from?
He came from the Wairarapa. He was very much a Wairarapa man. Greytown, he was actually born in Masterton, but he grew up in Greytown.
And where did he go to school? Where did he go to primary school?
He went to the Greytown Primary, and I think it was a district high. Yeah, he went right through from Primer 1 to 2 years secondary. He had it at the Greytown District High School.
Oh, so he went to high school there.
Yeah.
Was he was he focused on anything? Was he into sports? Was he into?
He was very into sport. Rugby was his thing. He was a Wairarapa rep, and he was a little guy, a halfback. Oh, but he played in many tough games. He's had teeth knocked out and played when he's concussed and all those things that they used to do. He had 2 brothers, and they were all little guys, and were all great rugby players, and they were hard little men.
Good little scrappers.
They really were.
So did his favourite subjects at school, like?
He hated school.
He hated it?
Only the sport was the only bit of school he liked.
He couldn't wait to get out of it?
That's right.
How old were you when you first started dating?
Oh, well, there's a question now. Let me think. Well, I was a bit of a late starter. My cousin Barry Stoop took me to school dances when I was young. Cousin Barry had a reputation of being the bad boy of the class. He died at our rest home here last year, I think. But dating as such, well, like my parents, I actually met through church. My parents met through Bible class at the Methodist church here, which was called St Paul's,
yep.
which was opposite the police station. That's significant, right? The churches were all allocated land, and so next to the Methodist section, the old Methodist hall is now at the far end of Revel Street. The big old church was pulled down when we moved to St Andrews. We combined with St Andrews, the Methodists and Presbyterians. But there was Methodist property, Presbyterian property, Catholic property, all allocated, and the Anglican property. And the Presbyterians had an old church that was very close to the old Methodist wooden church, but then the Presbyterians built in stone, and the Methodists joined with the Presbyterian. Well, Mum and Dad met at the old St Paul's Methodist Bible class. They had a very big Bible class, which was what young workers went to. It was a social focus for young workers of the town.
Yeah.
And, they played table tennis and they had dances, and as well as doing a bit of Bible study occasionally, but it was a social hub. That's that time church was.
Learning to grow up.
Yeah, and that's when I met. This was still current in my era, but not as big as it had been. And I met Keith Woodley there as a Methodist. And our first date, we decided we'd take a picnic lunch, and this is before the roads were sealed. We would bike out to Woodstock, walk up the Remu Hill, and it was much longer and windier in those days, and bike to the far side of Lake Mahinapua and go in there and have a picnic lunch, which we did. Then we'd biked all the way round the unsealed road, round Lake Mahinapua, back to town. Now, we were good Methodists, we didn't drink. By the time we got to the Mahinapua Hotel, we were pretty thirsty on those dusty roads. And we were underage because drinking was 21 then.
Yes.
But anyway, we sort of looked through the windows and we could see some people sitting down having a cup of tea. We thought, great, we can go in and have a cup of tea perhaps. So we went in and they looked at us and said, you're too young to be. And we said, oh, we're wondering if we could have a cup of tea. I said, we're the owners, we're having a cup of tea and we're not serving you. So we didn't get our cup of tea.
Oh no, goodness me. So, Rosalie, can you recall, like, I married a Methodist girl, coming from a Catholic family,
right?
And at the time there was discussions in both families about whether that was appropriate or not. Do you recall those days?
That era, it was like that. And a good story about Remu and Woodstock. Mum, Alva Reynolds, Alva Stoop she was then, she lived at the top of the hill in Remu, and the state school was down at Woodstock.
Right.
The Catholic school was up the top of so the kids from Woodstock had to go up to Remu, and they'd pass on that Remu hill.
Yep.
And the kids would hurl abuse at each other, both verbal and stones occasionally.
Yes, yeah, I recall it.
And like Jim Keenan, the Keenans had the hotel, didn't they?
Yes, they did, yeah.
They were enemies as school kids.
Yeah.
But late in life, they were great buddies, you know. Their lives were so different. My Jack, Sugrue, is Irish, and his dad was Catholic but didn't go to church. But he wouldn't go, he was so Catholic, he wouldn't go to all his daughters' weddings because they married non-Catholics, you see. But they had actually grown up Methodist because Jack's mum was Methodist and she went reasonably often. The father never went. She heard there was a big Catholic mission coming to Greytown and that they were rounding up anyone with a Catholic connection to get their children baptised, and the children hadn't been baptised. Jack's mother was a dressmaker and she learnt about this from ladies she was making dresses for.
Right.
And so she took her kids down to the Methodist church and got them all baptised before the Catholic evangelist came to town.
I love it. And you know, if you talk to people today about those frictions that were there, they wouldn't understand, would they?
They wouldn't, not at all. And it's so good that they don't have them, but they were real.
Oh, they're definitely real. Rosalie, what did you most admire about Jack?
Well, I think he was just a thoroughly decent guy. Like, you know, JCs, we were very involved in JCs here. He was, what do you call it, was the president of JCs? I'm not sure. He was also, but after JCs, JCs stopped at 40. And that's why we don't have JCs now, because young people don't have any spare time to put into community service like they used to.
True.
I mean, the original toilets by the museum were built by JCs. The playground up by the Scout Den was built by JCs. They did a lot of things in the town at the time, but it folded. And of course, you've got to stop being a JC when you turn 40. You get awarded with your exhausted rooster's badge. It's a rooster on its back with its legs up.
It's all over, and you're off to Rotary.
And no, Lions.
Lions.
And so Jack was president of Lions for a couple of years after JCs, yeah.
The Lions these days in Hokitika, incredible the work they do.
That's great.
They're just the most amazing organisation.
And they always have been. Of course, it would have been a JC goes to Lions.
Rosalie, how long were you and Jack married?
Oh, we got our 50th anniversary that our children put on for us, which was wonderful. The Fisherman's Table, it's a lovely cafe that overlooks the Kapiti coast at Paikakariki.
50.
Yeah, but Jack did get Alzheimer's towards the end, but he was very much still. Some people get Alzheimer's and they cease to be who they are.
Yeah.
Jack never did. He was always Jack. He knew who his family were. He could get lost if he went out the gate.
Yep.
But he knew people. He was bright, chirpy. If you went to a cafe or a restaurant, he'd be chatting up the waiters, waitress, and they would never know. If he had to go to the toilet, he couldn't get his way back to the table.
Yeah, that's a blessing.
And
It's a
it was
blessing because
And I put a lot of this down to our daughter Tralee, who is a GP, who's also into holistic medicine, and she was very keen to keep him off any of these drugs that people try and push on Alzheimer's.
Yep.
And it just gets them agitated and turns them into zombies. She only gave him herbal remedies, and he was happy. He died in bed beside me, which was just what we wanted, very happily, you know. He had a very happy life. We got to 52 years, I think. Did we just get? Well, it was only 51. We had this nice wedding anniversary at 51. At 50, I mean. 50. I think he might have. We got past 50 anyway.
Yeah.
It was either 51 or 52 years together.
So how many children did you have?
Three children.
And what do they do?
Well, they all went through Westland High School.
Right.
And so Westland High School can have some credit for Tralee becoming a doctor,
Right.
a GP. Tralee was at University of Otago. That's why we shifted from here to Otago, because she wanted to be a doctor and that's where the med school was. And because we're in Otago, we thought our 3 kids would go there. Troy was supposed to go there, but he was very musical, and he begged us to let him play for a thing that was on at the Fortune Theatre in Dunedin. That would have meant not going to university, and so he sort of missed out on university because he when he got to university he missed orientation week, and he felt quite lost, so sort of went his own way.
Yeah.
And did better than both the doctor and the youngest son Terry, who did a law degree. Both Terry and Tralee have got double degrees that they got at Otago. Troy didn't get any, but he became an events manager in Auckland, and is part owner of a very big Auckland's events company, and he's the creative director. And he was earning more money than either his, 2 siblings who have double degrees until COVID.
Of course.
It's no good being an events manager
No.
when COVID is happening.
So where does Tralee live these days?
She lives, that's why I'm on the Kapiti coast, because she's on the Kapiti coast, and she's got a GP practice at Romati, which is part of Paraparaumu, which is the main centre of the Kapiti coast.
And does she have a partner?
She does.
And
his name is Alan Harvey.
right.
But Tralee has kept Rosalie Sugrue. She is known as Dr. Sugrue. Well, she's known as Dr. Tralee more, but she's definitely Dr. Rosalie Sugrue.
Sounds a bit like a mother.
I was quite, well, in those days, you took your husband's name with pride, really.
Of course.
In a way, even though I did bring women into JCs when it was an all-men's outfit. Nationally, I was the first woman to speak from the floor of a JC conference, because our JCs admitted women, the individual chapters could, but nationally wouldn't. And so I was able to give an impassionate speech about bringing women into JCs.
Well, that would have gone down well, actually.
Well, it didn't. It did actually. I got an extension of time, and in those days the microphones would cut off.
Right.
You got an amber light that gave you so many seconds more, and then when it went red, you lost your microphone unless someone moved an extension of time. And I got the extension of time, but the vote was very close whether to accept women nationally or not, and we just missed out. But it sowed the seeds, and various chapters all around the country started admitting women, and then. But I can't really claim that I did it, but I certainly started it.
So Tralee has children?
Tralee has one son, Scott,
Yes.
who is now a father himself, with two small kiddies who will be coming to Hokitika today.
So you're a great-grandmother?
I am.
Goodness me.
I
Well,
am.
you're a pretty good nick for a great-grandmother.
Well,
You are.
that's...
Now, what about Terry? Where does Terry live?
Well, Terry and Troy both live in Auckland.
Right.
And they both actually live on the North Shore, not far from each other. And I've just come from there, having had Christmas in Auckland with both sons. They have 3 children each. Terry's are still at school. Troy's eldest 2 have left school and are still living at home though.
And did Terry follow law?
Well, he's in the legal department of Auckland Transport.
Right.
He's not a lawyer as such, but it's because he's got a law degree that he's doing this work.
Of course.
He did the OE and worked in the legal department of London taxis.
Well, that's
He knows all you need to know about a London taxi, which there's not too much use in Auckland, but a bit of help.
And so 3 grandchildren there?
3 grandchildren there.
Any sign of any great-grandchildren out of that lot?
No. The eldest 2 of my other grandchildren
Yes.
are 19 and 20.
Oh yeah, they were still pretty
So
young.
they're still doing their thing.
And Troy's enjoying Auckland?
He is, very much so.
And they'll get through there eventually.
Yeah. He's already got his sights set on another job. He makes a lot of videos for big companies like Fonterra, Coca-Cola and things like that, in-house videos that the public doesn't see.
Yeah.
And he's actually got a job lined up in January doing some of that sort of work for Fonterra as himself, not his company.
Yeah. Well, look, people that are creative like that,
He's very creative.
they just keep on going.
Yeah.
You know, they really do. What about your grandparents? Did you ever meet your grandparents?
I certainly did.
4 of them or 3 of them or
The 4 of them?
all 4?
I tell you, we're hardy stock. We're real West Coast stock.
That's
They were
quite
all
unusual.
born here. Right. Well, on my mum's side, it was May and Charles Stoop. And they lived in the 2-storied house that still exists in Fitzherbert Street. 84 Fitzherbert Street. What's it opposite there? It's opposite a motel now, isn't it? In Fitzherbert Street.
Right.
And it was built by Percy Goodfellow, who also built the 2-storied house that I mentioned earlier that Jack and I lived in. But, and there weren't that many 2-storied houses in Hokitika in those times. You could sort of number them on your fingers. But that 2-storied house is where Mum lived, and she ended up in the little double unit at the end of that block there. Mum lived there till she went into Panama. Ellen Bryant.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And so,
Mum's my grandparents, to get back to them, they lived in Remu, and Charles had this gold claim, and then he became the county overseer when they moved into town, and they bought that 2-storied house, and he would travel down South Westland in a car. Not many people had cars in those days doing the county overseer work in South Westland. So that was Charles Stoop, but he did die when I was 4, I think. I think both my grandfathers died when I was either 4 or 5. I can remember them both. They made an impression on me.
wow.
But my grandmothers both lived in town and died in town in their 80s. Oh no, one was in her 70s. Nana Stoop, May Stoop, she used to take boarders. When Errol lived at home until he married, and in that big 2-storied house, and then May used to take in boarders in that house for a long, long time. But she actually died when she moved to a little house on Revel Street. She thought, eventually I've got to downsize and I can't keep having boarders. But she strained her heart, building a stone fence by carrying boulders from the beach to build this. So she was still in her 70s when she died. Grandma lived in Saul Street after having lived in Waitaha. When they sold the farm in Waitaha, she moved up to town here and lived in a house in Saul Street. Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you got a television or a refrigerator?
Well, you see, the television was the one my dad built as a kid set, but refrigerator, no. I mean, I was at teachers' college before we got a refrigerator. We just had a safe at the back of the house, on the shady side of the house.
Yeah.
That you know, a little box with slats in it and netting so the flies couldn't get in.
And did it work?
Yeah, well, that's what everyone had in those days. It had to work. I mean, that's all you had.
So how did you get on with meat?
Well, you'd buy it regularly. You'd come down and buy meat several times a week at the butcher's.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, you'd bike down.
How's the world different today than from when you were a child?
Well, it just really amazes me that I can remember, like in Waitaha, we didn't have electricity. I can remember the oil burning lamps and things when I stayed in the farm at Waitaha. And of course outside toilets and things. I mean, there was a night cart in Hokitika till the 60s. Yeah. So I can remember that lifestyle. Like Dad out at work at McKay's Creek. Their dunny was a genuine long drop. It was over a mine shaft. It never needed emptying.
Wow! That'd make you a wee bit nervous, wouldn't it?
well, yes, as kids it did actually.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Because we used to go out for days there. Because though that place had to be staffed 24/7, the men weren't working 24/7.
Yeah.
So they all had their hobbies. Dad had his ham radios and things out there. Another man made model aeroplanes that were all attached to the ceilings. Another man grew fruit trees. They all had their little hobbies while they were working. And families, you know, whose folk worked there, we would go out and have picnic days out there. But I keep getting sidetracked. Put me back on track. What are we talking about?
Oh no, we were just you've covered that quite well. What about you've done a lot of travel?
Oh, the world being different. That's
Yes.
right. And now all this technology. It's just amazing. That's been the biggest thing. I mean, I learned typing at school in my sixth form year.
Yeah.
But there was no sign of computers, and you know that's been the biggest change. And the world is. We used to play outside. We weren't mollycoddled as kids. We had a great life growing up here. And now I think kids, I don't know, perhaps Hokitika kids are different. But the kids I see in Kapiti, that's got a lovely beach, you don't often see them on the beach. They're more on their devices.
Quite a big change, isn't it?
It's a big change.
Now you've done quite a lot of travelling in your
I
time.
have, yes.
Anywhere you've been to where you've gone, this is beautiful. I'd love to live here.
Look, I've seen a lot of very beautiful places. I really have, and probably because I've been a Brighton, I was programmed to love England and thatched cottages and rolling fields and hedgerows and the coast, because most of my forebears come from England, some come from Germany, but Cornwall, I've got on both sides of the family, and I love Cornwall, Devon, round there, because that's sort of where my family come from. Jack's came from Ireland. They're beautiful, but you know, I've always felt that New Zealand's the best little country in the world, and the coast, though it's not a calm, beautiful, manicured beauty, it's got such a wonderful wild beauty, hasn't it? And this is my Terani Waiwai. The coast is you know, where I feel grounded, where I belong, because with all my forebears, most of them being born here, and them pretty much all being buried in the Hokitika cemetery. I mean, where else could I be?
How many of your ancestors are at the Hokitika cemetery?
Well, I'm pretty sure that they are all my husband Jack is there, and I will join him. And folks, he's actually got 802 written on his grave. And if you're wondering, why that's there, the locals will have to tell you.
Oh, I think let's for the record, let's tell people why when you first contacted me, I said, oh, 802 Jack Sugrue. The good lady in the information centre when we came through an hour ago said, Rosalie, oh, 802 Jack Sugrue. And it's incredible.
Well, you see, Jack used to have, we were a few small builders in town, and they had plenty of work at one stage, but, the more the mills closed down and the more the coast was getting depressed, the builders were in big competition. So his slogan was, phone 802, or was it ring? Phone 802 for Jack Sugrue. And that was on his ad in the local newspaper, The Guardian, and written on his van, and we also had on his van, make it Jack built, but that never had the same impact as phone 802 for Jack Sugrue. And people just used to call him 802.
Now the 802, Rosalie,
that was our telephone number.
So that was in the days where there was manual exchange, was it?
We had a manual exchange in Hokitika, where this very building is here.
Oh, is this where it was?
This is where it was. It was upstairs above the post office.
Oh, wow.
But this has been an added floor, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So the floor
the
below
next one down.
was the exchange.
Wow. Wow. and
people would sit there plugging plugs in and listening in on it. Because, of course, all the country lines, Kokoto Kotoragi, they all had letters after them. So you had the Morse code. Like, if it was S, let me think. It's S, dit, dit, dit. I'm just trying to think of, S is dit, dit, dit. So it would be 3 short rings.
Right.
So you all on a line out at Kokotai, like would be, I don't know, say 792 or something, 792 and a letter, S, 792 M, 792, J.
Is that how it worked?
That's how it worked.
I know that I can recall ringing someone one day and the lovely lady in the exchange said, oh look, they're away for a couple of days, Bruce. Isn't that amazing?
That's right, they knew this, they'd tell you. And you could listen in on each other's if you had a party line. And they couldn't do anyone all the time.
Coasters, I'm with Rosalie Sugrue and we're just talking about her amazing mother. Now, I weren't aware of that New Zealand award that she received. Rosalie, tell me about it.
Well, my mum was a great community person in this community. She really was. She was in just so many things. Red Cross, Boys Brigade, patrons and this and that, guides. And she just worked all her life really, hospital visiting and all these sorts of things. Well, she won the Tower Senior Achiever of the Year, and that is for New Zealand, when they have these special awards. And Jack and I went to Government House with Mum, and there was a big dinner, and we didn't know who the winner was, but we had been told to make sure Mum was at it. So we thought, well, she must be getting some award, and when the silver awards were both announced, because there were 2 silvers, there'd been some highly commended things.
Yeah.
2 silvers, Mum hasn't been mentioned. Why? Oh no, why hasn't she been mentioned? And she got the gold award for the top senior achiever of New Zealand, for the amount of things she'd done basically in the Hokitika community.
Well, she was a wonderful mayoress.
I don't think she ever stopped being a mayoress. I heard them complain that after she was no longer mayoress, she still fulfilled the role.
I love it. Hey, thank you so much for that, Rosalie. It's a great bit of information that you've been able to share with coasters.
My pleasure.
So, Rosalie, as we get to the end of this, what else can we talk about?
Oh, well, I was just starting to say about, I think all my forebears, from my Jack to my parents to my 4 grandparents, my 8 great-grandparents, and I've got some great-greats. But one of them I do know is not buried there, but her name is on the grave because her husband is buried there. They lived in Wataroa, and she is buried in Wataroa. But so she's buried on the coast, but her name, if it hasn't, withered off, is on her husband's grave here. So I sort of think I can claim that as all my direct forebears being buried in the Hokitika cemetery.
And so you've got your space booked for 30 years' time? And
I have, well, yeah, exactly.
I mean, wouldn't it be great to be able to interview you when you get your letter from the Queen? Can we make that? Can we make a deal on that?
Well, okay, Bruce. I do hope you're still the mayor.
well, look,
Perhaps you don't.
look, as long as I've got a camera, I'll be right.
Yeah, all you need is the camera, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, no, you don't want to be mayor for too long, quite frankly. I mean, look what's happened to Tim Shadbolt. No, when the time comes, you've got to go.
Every good captain
Knows where to go.
knows when to go.
That's it.
And that's the secret to the whole.
Now, my dad has his memorial steps, so you're aware of down on
Yes,
the beach here?
yes, I do, yeah.
The Winster Memorial Steps there, Winster Reynolds.
Yeah, they're the steps that lead from Weld Lane up onto the beach.
That's right.
And there's a wee, there's a wee plaque there.
Yes.
And but what did Winston do in his day as mayor? What were the things that you recall?
Yeah, well, the actual, well, I was having babies at that time, and I was less interested in politics. But I think Dad helped save the Carnegie building. I understand there was a move in town when they built the new library to get rid of old buildings. Let's modernise the town.
Yep.
And Dad believed in saving old buildings. And I'm pretty sure that he enabled that building not to be wrecked. The cannon, I think it's now in the river, isn't it? It used to be in Cass Square.
Yes, it is. It's down by the Custom House.
People wanted to get rid of the cannon. I think it was Steve Havel that was actually keenest in getting rid of it. But at any rate, they thought it would make better scrap metal than having a cannon in Cass Square. And he put it on the train to take it off to Canterbury. And according to my brother, who was here at the time, because this was when I was overseas, or teaching, I wasn't in Hokitika anyway, my brother was still at school here, Dad went storming down and stopped the train dramatically and
Wow.
had the cannon offloaded.
Because it was going to go for scrap.
Yeah.
Look, we change our views on things over the years, don't we?
We do. That's right.
I recall when they closed the native logging. I was extremely distressed. I thought it was the worst thing that could ever happen.
Yeah.
If you ask me about it today, my position is totally
Different,
reversed.
but it needs to be done responsibly. It can still be done.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing.
Yeah, and I recall looking at Seddon House once and counting the bricks.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, at 40 cents a brick, we should pull this down. Now,
It's a huge change. But you need someone that's got a different attitude to the general public to look at it more carefully, don't you?
Look, absolutely. And that news that Heritage New Zealand had bought Seddon House and they're going to spend 22 million doing it up was the best news I've had since I've been mayor.
That's wonderful.
It's a beautiful building inside.
That's great. And it's really, see, my dad, of course, his grandfather had to clear the bush on that Waitaha Hour.
Yeah.
It was all virgin bush. And of course, Hokitika had been bush and it had been cleared, and my dad knew that. And when he was mayor, my brother was at university at Canterbury, and he'd come home from his holidays and say, "Dad, this town is terrible. It hasn't got any trees in it." And Dad would say, "Why does a town want trees in it? We'd all this trouble to get rid of them."
Yeah. Isn't Hokitika a credit to the people who laid it out?
They laid it out. That's what Trelise said when we came into town. It's so beautifully laid out. And of course, there was nothing on the terraces really, except Seaview and Westland Hospital and the cemetery. And that beautiful view from the cemetery, and of course, then Whitcomb Terrace and Bonner Drive, and those places were built. But my brother, this I have to tell you, as I said, he was a prefect at school, and it had a time as being youth here. He was very involved in town affairs, but he never lived here after he left. But he did rag Dad about the town not having trees. and other things, because his heart was in Hokitika, as everyone's is really. He's born here. Well, my brother died unexpectedly of a brain hemorrhage, and he's 5 years younger than me, and it was quite distressing, about 4 years ago. And he's buried in Hamilton because that's where he was living at the time, and he was actually a keen Rotary man and had a big project of running a big Rotary book fair at the time. We've always been into doing this sort of thing. But he died there and he's buried there. But like me, he loved things English because he read all the Enid Blyton books. He wanted an oak coffin, the family knew this, and he's buried in a cemetery there that's got an oak portion. It's just the way, it's just how the cemetery's set out. And he was given, his family was given an oak sapling. And they brought it down here, and we've got permission, I don't know if I got it from you or who we got permission from, to have Ron's oak planted in the Hokitika cemetery so we could have a last laugh at Dad that at least he got an English tree.
I love it. I love it. Look, they're special, aren't they? And it'll live for 100, 200, 300 years.
Well, we do hope. I haven't been up there yet. I'm hoping it survived. I'm going up to see it tomorrow or this afternoon even. But it was a lovely sort of a family thing, and that we felt that Ron wasn't buried here, but he's got a presence in the Hokitika cemetery. It's just as you go in the entrance, there's a big grassy area on the left, and there's the Reynolds oak there.
Okay, I'll have a look. Well, look, Rosalie, thank you so much for allowing me the time to talk to you and get you to share just some of your history with Coasters. Coasters, this series of interviews, there are 7 of them, and they'll be played over 7 weeks, and they'll start in another 3 or 4 days. They'll be on our YouTube channel, the full interview, and a copy of the interview will go to the family, and a copy on a memory stick will go to the Hokitika Museum. So if you want to be able to ever find it, just ask for Rosalie Sugrue, a coaster. They're the key words.
Wonderful, and I'm so grateful for you doing this for the coast. I think it's wonderful that you're preserving this history, and with your Coasters Club and all your little random interviews you do. It's an amazing thing. And as the daughter of a mayor, I would like to thank you for doing such a good job of what you are doing.
It can be no greater compliment, Coasters, and we'll catch you later.